Hello everyone and welcome to the third and final part of the Ultimate Superman Review. In this three-part series, I have covered the entire history of Superman on the big screen, from Kirk Alyn to Christopher Reeve, from Henry Cavill to David Corenswet, from live action to animated, all in anticipation of James Gunn's new start to the DC Universe, Superman. In part 1, I talked about the classic era of Superman in film with the Kirk Alyn, George Reeves, and Christopher Reeve Superman films. In part 2, I covered every single animated movie with Superman in the title, and in this final part, we're going to cover the modern era of live-action Superman films with one show that I couldn't possibly forget to talk about in this series. And just like part 1, I'll be grading all of these films on 5 different categories: the Superman/Clark Kent, Lois/Clark, and Daily Planet character dynamics. I'll also be grading them on the abilities and heroism each film portrays, along with grading each of the villains of each story. And by the very end of this video, I will finally be able to rank every single Superman project to see who reigns as the greatest Superman of them all. Alright, so I have a ton of projects to get into, so let's begin with the first Superman film to bring this character into the modern era of film history with Superman Returns. I'd actually never seen this movie before preparing for this video, and I think it was for 2 main reasons. For one, I heard that it was technically a continuation of the Reeve films, which I'd also never really seen before, and second, it was because I heard it was a massive disappointment because of its lack of action, resulting in a boring Superman film. Add on the fact that this movie is cursed with its main villain and director being outed as truly despicable people, I just never felt the need to ever watch this film. And if you watched part 1, you know that I found a large appreciation for the Reeve era of Superman films. Despite them all getting worse as time went on, one thing always stayed consistent: the tone and hopeful nature of Christopher Reeve in the role always kept me engaged. So I was very pleasantly surprised to see how much of a continuation this was for the Reeve films in both story and tone. You can very easily watch Superman the movie, Superman 2, and then Superman Returns as a trilogy. The cast and script feel so in line with those other films, even if most of the elements here work a little bit less than what came before. I found myself very much enjoying Brandon Routh as the star of this film. You can definitely tell that he was directed to essentially do an impression of Christopher Reeve. His Clark in particular works perfectly as he's able to capture the bummelingly charming nature of the character. As for his Superman, his stoicism and charisma isn't nearly as strong as Reeve, but that really is a tall order. His Superman was still good enough to not be distracting when transitioning from the Reeve films to Routh. I do think the biggest issue with his performance here is the fact that he was directed to do what Christopher Reeve did, leaving him no real space to make the character his own. I really like Brandon Routh as an actor. He played the Atom in the CW DC universe, which I was very much a fan of throughout the first few seasons of Arrow and The Flash, and I believe he even got a chance to return as Superman in the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline. Hell, I also love him in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in the very small role that he has in that. But similar to another actor that I will be talking about in this video, I very much wish he got a second chance to prove himself as this character on the big screen, because as is, Brandon Routh fades into the background of conversations when it comes to on-screen adaptations of Superman. Routh's chemistry with Kate Bosworth also translated pretty well from the Reeve films to this one. It very much does depend on the audience's willingness to accept new actors in these roles, and because I was, it ended up working for me.
Maybe it was hard to say goodbye because he had to go and wanted to say goodbye, but maybe it was too difficult for him.
Difficult? What's so difficult about it? Goodbye. It's easy. What's so hard about saying goodbye?
In between Superman 2 and the events of this film, Superman flew off to see the remnants of Krypton for himself, leading to his absence for 5 years. And in this time, Lois ends up moving on and has a full-on relationship with Perry White's nephew, Richard, played by James Marsden. Of course, with Superman's return, old feelings are brought forward, leading to some tension between these characters. And when this plot point was first introduced, I was honestly a bit nervous, as the trope of couples no longer being together once a legacy sequel comes along is very much a thing in movies today. So I was very much looking forward to disliking Marsden in this film, but unfortunately, he was very charming, and the film sold me on why Lois would go for a guy like this. He's genuinely a good guy and cares deeply for his new family in Lois and their son that they have together, who I'll get into in a second here. Despite not having the powers of Superman, he still goes out of his way to try and save Lois and her son, which I thought was extremely admirable. So Lois's complicated feelings about the return of the man she once loved was pretty conflicting, and it added a lot to the dynamic between these characters. And then there's Jason, who we discover is Superman's son, and I absolutely loved this subplot as well. It wasn't a twist that I was expecting, really, and it added a whole other layer of complications. If there is anything from this film that I am the most upset that we never got to see a follow-up for, it's this storyline.
Will we see you? Around?
I'm always around.
Nope, you actually won't. The Daily Planet dynamic here was also really solid. I really like the banter between Lois, Jimmy, and White, where we finally get to hear some iconic Superman quotes that I believe we actually haven't heard up until this point.
Look, in the sky, Chief.
It's a bird.
It's a plane.
No, look, it's...
You wanted to see me?
And the Jimmy Olsen story of him trying to get a good picture of Superman was great, with it leading to the iconic image of Superman catching the globe from the Daily Planet as it falls towards the ground. But that brings me to the powers and heroism section, which thrives similar to the Reeve era of films. I absolutely loved the opening sequence of this film. We see Luthor testing Kryptonian crystals and its effects it has when it contacts water, which sparks a massive earthquake that sparks these issues on this plane/shuttle launch. This sequence of Superman catching the plane is easily one of the most iconic moments in this film and remains to this day probably my favorite moment of Superman in any of these films. Then immediately after this, we get a great montage of Superman saving people, which at this point is a requirement for me, and then he catches the globe and then he saves the world. He's just very heroic throughout this entire film. Plus, this being the first Superman film in the modern era leads to some pretty sweet visuals, despite some of the CG feeling a little bit dated to today's standards. But honestly, I think it holds up as well as it could be after coming out in, I believe, 2006 or 2007. But after watching this movie, I really can't get behind the arguments that this movie is boring. Yeah, sure, it's true that this film isn't packed with action sequences like movies today, and the runtime is fairly hefty. I think if anything, it is just a little bit too long. So if action sequences are all you want, then I can see this being boring. But the character dynamics and the story felt so much in line with the tone and pacing of the Reeve films, and compared to those movies, the action in this film is fantastic. Then we have Lex Luthor as the villain of this movie. Kevin Spacey unfortunately plays Luthor in this, and unfortunately, he's one of the best parts of the film. His Lex was almost perfect. It takes just the right beats from Gene Hackman's portrayal while making the role entirely his own. He was funny when he needed to be and menacing when the film needed to be serious. His plan was essentially to create a new continent with the crystals from the Fortress of Solitude mixed with some kryptonite, and in doing so, he destroyed the United States, putting himself at the top of this new land so he can sell off his newly acquired beachfront property. I do still prefer the more public-facing Lex Luthor, whose money and political power makes him untouchable, over the evil criminal mastermind that works inside of the shadows, but I think that this film's take on the latter worked in spades. Also, him being stranded on a tiny beach was the greatest karma to end off this character.
I would trade 300,000 coconuts and every ounce of your blood for a quart of gasoline!
So yeah, honestly, this movie surprised me a lot. Maybe it's the lower expectations make me like this movie more than I really should, but I genuinely think that if this movie were to come out today, it would crush with both critics and audiences, unlike when it first came out. Especially in the current state of comic book films, yeah, I think this movie was quite refreshing. Such an underrated movie, in my opinion. So when rating this film, the Superman/Clark Kent dynamic gets a 3.5 out of 5. I love the complexities when it came to the Lois and Clark dynamic, 4 out of 5. The Daily Planet dynamic was also solid here as well, so I'll probably also give that a 3.5 out of 5. Powers and heroism are honestly some of the best we've seen at this point in live action, so 4 out of 5 despite what some would say about the lack of action. And this being my favorite Lex Luthor at this point does lead to me giving this category a 4.5 out of 5, but since it's Spacey, 1 out of 5. Fuck that guy. Superman was once again in movie jail after the lukewarm reception to Superman Returns, but during this time, Batman had a renaissance as Christopher Nolan's gritty and realistic take on the character found incredible success. Enter Zack Snyder and his new take on Superman that's brought in the same mindset that Nolan had when approaching his Batman films. But is that same mindset the proper one for a Superman movie? That quickly became the debate amongst so many people. In 2013, I was very much getting into comic book films. The Dark Knight was my favorite movie of all time, and with that trilogy coming to an end and the MCU hitting a new high with the Avengers, I grew so incredibly excited to see Man of Steel in theaters as my first real introduction to the character. That's right, Man of Steel was the first time I ever encountered the character of Superman, so I think that very much, informed my opinions of this film at the time, which have shifted a little bit since. I remember loving this movie when I first watched it all these years ago, but my older brother and parents walked out of this film disappointed, and because I'd never seen the animated series or the Reeve films, I simply never understood why until more recent years as I've explored the character's roots more closely. And when talking about this film today, I still like this movie a lot, but rather as a superhero sci-fi action film, not necessarily as a Superman movie. So let's get into why that is the case for me now. So how is Henry Cavill as Clark Kent and Superman? I actually think he's great in this movie. The first half of the film is still pretty great in my eyes. The intro on Krypton is a great way to start the film, and I like the non-linear storytelling the film uses to catch us up to speed with his origin. Seeing Clark bounce around from job to job, saving random people in his wake was great. The oil rig scene is solid, but him saving the school bus full of kids is my favorite Clark moment in this film. And yes, I know that isn't Henry Cavill, but it goes to show that this character in general is heroic. And I think that everyone, both Snyder superfans and haters, can agree that the first flight sequence with Henry Cavill is one of the best Superman moments in any film, especially as it's uplifted by Hans Zimmer's incredible score. His struggle in harnessing this power of his is fascinating to watch, but it's his perseverance and joy when he finally is able to take off that really solidifies Henry Cavill as Superman in this film in particular. But this is where my issues now come into play. Immediately after this, Zod is brought into the picture and we enter the Signs alien-esque storyline. I actually really dig the tone here. It is unsettling and is a great reintroduction for Zod at this point in the story. In terms of bringing these characters into a more grounded and realistic world, it is very effective. But from here on out, we actually never get to see Cavill's Superman save anyone besides one random soldier outside of saving Lois 4 or 5 times. Yes, he does save the world at large here, but there's something more directly relatable and heroic in seeing this character stop falling debris from hitting a civilian than seeing this character punch Zod through a building. And on top of that, we never get to see the mask that is Clark Kent at the Daily Planet. This is an integral part of the Clark/Superman persona, and we only get a hint of that at the very end of this film. Then we have Amy Adams as Lois Lane. Adams is one of my favorite actresses working today. Hell, my favorite movie of all time is Arrival, and yes, that movie does give me Man of Steel vibes, which is not unfounded on me. But I sadly think that she was either miscast here or the material she was given was just simply not great. We do have a Lois that is able to figure out Superman's identity through her investigative journalism, albeit it wasn't all that hard for her to do. I said it many times in the first 2 parts that I do prefer a Lois who is in on Superman's world. This is my preferred version of the character, so that is a win in my book. However, she doesn't have all that great of chemistry with Cavill. And I think this is partly due to the fact that they don't really share any scenes together that aren't action scenes, besides maybe just one. Their first meeting is an action scene. Lois going to Jonathan Kent's grave is technically not an action scene, but we do intercut that conversation with Pa Kent's death, which is an action scene. And yes, I do think his death here is dumb, but that's a whole other story. Their best scene together is the interrogation scene, which is unfortunately interrupted by Swanwick, and then from here on out, we just see Superman in full action mode with little interstitials with Lois here and there. Then we get the cheeky welcome to the planet line, which I love, before we cut to the credits.
Hi. Lois Lane. Welcome to the planet.
Compared to every other adaptation of Lois and Clark, it's an okay starting point, but because we never really get anything more between them after this point, it ends up being the weakest on rewatch. If there was a sequel that gave more time before we got into the BVS storyline, maybe I'd feel differently. I will have so much more to say on this subject later on, but as for this film itself, Lois is unfortunately one of the biggest disappointments for me every time I revisit this film. The Daily Planet dynamic almost doesn't exist here, but there are enough scenes with Lois and Perry, who is played excellently by Lawrence Fishburne, that are pretty great. And honestly, by the time we get to Act 3, Perry White is 10 times more heroic than Superman ever gets. I love the film cutting back to him, Lombard, and Jenny during the final battle. Him staying in the war zone in order to save his employees is so admirable. I just wish Superman just swept down at one point to help when all seemed to be hopeless. I think that could have added a lot to the final act of this film. And yes, I couldn't help but to already complain about the heroism aspect of this iteration of Superman, so if you weren't sure about how I felt about it, yeah, this is easily one of my least favorite parts of this film. I will give props to the younger pre-Superman era of Clark for his acts of heroism in the first 2 acts, but that never translates to him in costume, which when we get to BVS, that becomes immensely important. I also never really minded him killing Zod at the very end of this film. Even today, I still don't really care all that much. I'm sure if Snyder and Goyer wanted to, they could have written any other solution, but that's not the decision they made, so whatever. As for abilities, this is easily the best we've seen in live action. If Snyder can do anything, it's to create provides visually stunning action set pieces and flying sequences that blow everything else out of the water, even when compared to most of the sequences in James Gunn's Superman film. The action here does get a little bit exhausting as time goes on because it just goes on and on and on, and results in the film kind of boring me a little bit by the very end, as the character and plot progression essentially stop as soon as Superman leaves Zod's ship in the end of the second act. But still, from a visual standpoint, I really can't complain about Snyder's vision for this character, even if it's not the super bright and colorful vision that we've seen in previous films. And the villain of this film is of course iconic at this point. Michael Shannon's Zod is excellent in every single way. He may only have one note to him, but he sings it beautifully. His intensity emanates off the screen, and his drive to save his people in the only way he knows how is so incredibly tense. Again, his intro to the story is terrifying, and the plan to terraform Earth creates some of the highest stakes we've seen in any Superman film.
And every action I take, no matter how violent or how cruel, is for the greater good of my people.
So when rating this movie, the Clark-Superman dynamic gets a 4 out of 5 despite the lack of Clark inside this film. It sets up the character to have a solid return, which I genuinely wish we got. I thought Henry Cavill was great for the role, he just never really got a good second chance. The Lois and Clark dynamic gets a 2.5 out of 5. It just simply does not work for me here, and honestly, it does get worse from here. Daily Planet will get a slightly higher 3 out of 5, as the scenes with Lois that do work are the ones at the planet. Heroism and abilities is tricky, as the heroism side of things is not the strongest, but the abilities are the best that we've ever seen, 3.5 out of 5. And Zod's presence here as the villain is of course excellent, 4.5 out of 5. Okay, here we go. I've always maintained my enjoyment of this film and somewhat defense of it over the years. I believe I even have a video on this movie as well, where I think I gave it a pretty solid review, but man, did this movie fall flat after watching all of the animated films. This is the 4th time throughout the series where we get to see the death of Superman, and similar to my feelings on Man of Steel, without prior knowledge of this storyline, or at least how effective it can be, I actually really liked it when I first watched this film all those years ago. I always heard complaints from critics, friends, and especially my brother saying that this was way too rushed, and although I could somewhat understand those sentiments, I never truly felt that way myself. But after both of the other Doomsday adaptations in animation made me tear up, and upon rewatching this film and realizing that I had zero emotional response, yeah, I think I fully share those sentiments my brother had for this film several years ago now. I will continue to be a broken record and say that Lois Lane needs to be the main character in any storyline around the death of Superman. She's the single most important character to follow in grieving this loss, as no one else is nearly as attached to Superman as she is. And as I mentioned during my Man of Steel review, that film simply did not make me care of this version of Lois and Clark. And what makes it even worse is that the writing for Clark in this film is just straight up awful. This version of Superman doesn't save people because it's the right thing to do. He seems to be burdened with all of his abilities and with his need to save people. Honestly, this dour and depressing mood becomes infectious for the audience, and before somebody tries to argue with me and say that this is a low point for the character, we kind of need to see a high point before we get this kind of arc. The story of this film is supposed to show that the world is falling out of love with the Man of Steel, but the world never really got a chance to love him in the first place. His first act as Superman was the fight against Zod, which resulted in the destruction of a massive section of Metropolis. It devastated the entire city, killing thousands of people, and all of the controversies in the world of this film stem from this very same incident. Yet the film tries to tell us that the world used to love Superman, that a world without Superman is a world without hope, but we never really got to see this world embrace him as a symbol of hope. Maybe Lois got to feel that because Superman literally tells her that he represents hope, but that is never translated to the audience or the world within the story.
On my world, it means hope.
Well, here it's an S.
This movie tries so hard to make you question and dislike Superman, and instead of proving the haters wrong, they end up getting me on the side of the haters. Hell yeah, Batman, take more steroids, beef up, murder his alien ass, hashtag super shits, hashtag abs. This movie had me actively rooting for a Batman who kills. That's crazy. And don't even get me started on Batman shooting people or blowing people up or splattering their brains on the wall or straight up running them over with his supercar. I mean, you can watch my Batman marathon video if you really want to get into my rant on all of that. And yes, this movie may have got me on the side of Batman, but I was very much not rooting for Superman's other hater in this film, Lex Luthor, played by the truly miscast Jesse Eisenberg.
Ahoy, ahoy! I did not know you were here.
His manic performance here just is not Lex Luthor to me. It's a far cry from the Kingpin-esque presence of the animated series or the eccentric cave-dwelling criminal mastermind that Gene Hackman portrayed, or my preferred untouchable billionaire mastermind that I see this character as. His plan here is overly convoluted and incomprehensible in the theatrical cut. The Ultimate Edition does smooth this over, but still, his plan here is just a bit much. I don't hate it. The trial bombing sequence is built up very effectively within this film, but Eisenberg's performance prevents his story from being great. And where I praise Man of Steel for its action sequences, I really can't say the same for this movie. Besides the opening scene, which is phenomenal by the way, one of the best scenes in any DC movie, there really isn't much action here that excites me. Every Batman scene is pretty solid, but his constant need to murder became quite distracting, and the actual Batman vs Superman fight is overly slow and dramatic. It's not a terrible fight, and at one point in time, I did really like it, but I think they could have done so much better. At the end of this fight, we get the Martha scene, which I think enough people have already complained about, so no need to dwell on that here. So let's get into the Doomsday fight against Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. The action sequence here scratches the same itch that the Zod fight sequence scratched at the end of Man of Steel. It is epic, mindless, and loud all at the same time, with the Wonder Woman score hyping up the sequence much more than it probably deserves. And it culminates in Superman making the ultimate sacrifice play in killing Doomsday with the kryptonite spear that Batman made, essentially sacrificing his own life to save the world from this monster, saying one last goodbye to Lois in this scene that made me feel, well, nothing.
This is my world.
No, Clark, don't.
You are my world.
So when rating this film, the Clark/Superman rating falls quite a bit. We at least get some Clark at the Daily Planet, which isn't bad, just not nearly enough to give Cavill a chance to prove himself in the Clark Kent persona. I do really like that line that Perry has about no one caring about Clark Kent taking on the Batman. He's always a win, but the overall dour nature of Cavill's performance here as both characters leads me to rating this a 2.5 out of 5. The Lois and Clark dynamic relies so heavily on us being on board with their relationship after the first film, which I was not, so it completely fell flat for me in this 1 out of 5. I did like Perry White once again, but Lois investigating Lex Luthor for the Daily Planet was a convoluted mess, and Jimmy Olsen gets fridged, so 2 out of 5. In terms of heroism and abilities, the film decides to say in exposition that the city is empty for some reason and no one is in danger, rather than showing our heroes be, well, heroic. Superman does have a little montage, but he looks sad the entire time, and Batman kills people. But hey, it at least looks really cool. 2 out of 5. And finally, we have the villains. Lex Luthor is laughable, and Doomsday is fine, I guess. Batman is kind of the main villain from a certain point of view, but I agreed with him, so this also gets a 2 out of 5. I am going to skip both versions of Justice League as they are technically not Superman films, and, well, Superman is hardly in them, but I will say that I do have reviews for both versions of Justice League here on the channel that you can check out if you want to hear my thoughts on those. I will say the large reason as to why I dislike the Lois and Clark dynamics in these films are because of how little I cared by the time we got his resurrection in both versions of Justice League. That's really when I started to feel like the entire story in the universe was way too rushed. It's such a shame because I think if Cavill got a second chance at this character in his own solo film, and we built up Zack Snyder's Justice League, which I do like quite a bit, in a proper way, I think the DCEU could have absolutely thrived, but as is, this take on Superman is one of the most disappointing. The character of Superman once again went to movie jail after the complete failure that was the theatrical cut of Justice League. All of his cameos in other films or shows ended up being cut off at the neck or was silhouetted, leaving the fate of Henry Cavill as the character in limbo. But while all this chaos was occurring on the film side of things, on TV, we got one of the best Superman adaptations yet. At the very beginning of this 3-part series, I teased that I was going to be making one exception when it came to Superman on the small screen, and we have finally made it to that point. As I mentioned before, I was a fan of the CW DC universe with the first couple seasons of The Flash and Arrow, but quickly fell off from it as it got very, very bad very, very fast. So I actually never got around to watching this show when it first aired in 2021. But after hearing nothing but great things about this show, this actually ended up being the very first Superman project I watched in this marathon leading up to James Gunn's new film. Tyler Hoechlin and Elizabeth Tulloch played the title characters, with Alex Garfin playing their son Jordan Kent and Jordan Elsas or Michael Bishop in the later seasons playing Jonathan Kent. The story follows the Kent family visiting Smallville after the death of Martha Kent, and they end up staying in order to escape the fast life of the city, along with creating a safer environment to train Jordan when he begins to develop his powers. I love this concept for a Superman show, as it is something that we never really have seen up until this point. Yes, we did have the little tease in Superman Returns of Superman having a son, but that never got to go anywhere. This show managed to tell a Superman story that was wholly unique while maintaining the heart and action the character requires despite a lower TV budget. Tyler Hoechlin might just be my favorite actor to portray Clark Kent and Superman. Maybe it's the fact that he has the most screen time as compared to everyone else in film, but he genuinely does a phenomenal job as both characters. His Superman is exactly what you'd expect for this character. He is stoic and charming throughout every single season of the show, with some really iconic comic book moments finally being brought to life.
Here you go, friend.
Thanks. Cool costume.
Thanks. My mom made it for me.
His Clark was even better, as it was a refreshing new take on the character. Seeing Clark as a father to two teenage sons was quite different than anything we've seen before, balancing between teaching the more reckless teen in Jordan, who develops powers, with the golden boy perfect student who doesn't get powers in Jonathan, was fascinating to watch. And although the teenage angst could be overly CW at times, I was always invested in the grounded performance Hoechlin brought to the show. Then you have Elizabeth Tulloch, who is definitively my favorite Lois Lane. The show is called Superman and Lois, and the show does a fantastic job at making her a true lead in equal parts to Superman. Her parenting style mixed perfectly with Clark's, and her relationship with both boys was fantastic. Then you have the journalistic side of her character that was really the driving force for each season. She may not be working at the Daily Planet after moving to Smallville, but it doesn't stop her from taking truth into her own hands as an independent reporter. Superman may be able to handle all the larger physical threats, but it's Lois who is the one who uncovers the show's mysteries and takes down the bad guys from a legal standpoint. And the chemistry between Hoechlin and Tulloch was solid right from the very beginning, with it only getting better as the show went on.
Never met a Clark before.
Oh, I've never met a Lois before. Actually, there was my first grade teacher, Lois Hannigan, so I guess technically... Oh, technically you beat the second.
Heroism and abilities are great here despite the lower budget. This being a show has plenty of screen time to show Superman saving people. Lois was honestly very rarely a damsel in distress, which I very much appreciated. If anything, Superman saves his kids from the situations they find themselves in constantly, but there are so many other moments of Superman saving all these side characters and random bystanders throughout the entirety of the show. I absolutely love Lana's family and their involvement in the story as well. I definitely couldn't talk about Superman and Lois without talking about the Lana family, because they were just so great and such an integral role inside of every single season, except for maybe the fourth season, as their roles were scaled back a bit. If I had any flaws on the final season, that is definitely one of them. But this show is the reason why every time I now see Lana in any Superman film, it instantly becomes a positive. See my thoughts on Superman 3. And despite the TV budget, I think the effects work is very strong in this. It definitely is not on par with a multi-million-dollar film production, but it is miles better than the slop other DC shows had at the time. Now, I'm honestly not sure how many people have actually given this show a chance, so I do want to give a spoiler warning before I move on to some of the other details about this show, especially as it relates to the final season. But if this video does inspire you to do anything, I hope it's to get you to watch this show. It is fantastic, and it has one of my favorite series finales of all time. Okay, let's dive into some spoilers. When it comes to the villains, this show was quite good at it. Steel was an antagonist slash anti-hero in the first season, who quickly became one of my favorite characters as the show went on. I liked how it played with the idea of the multiverse and a world with an evil Superman. This eventually spawned the Bizarro storyline, which was a bit odd at times, especially with the music choices, but in terms of wacky Superman villains, I had a ton of fun with it. Chad L. Coleman played Bruno Mannheim, which was the villain of season 3. I love this actor as Tyrese in The Walking Dead, so it was great to see him here as well. Great example of a villain with a tragic reason to do the terrible things that he does, one of the more sympathetic Superman villains in this show. But the one I really want to talk about is Michael Cudlitz as Lex Luthor, who is introduced at the end of season 3, leading into the final season. Prior to the events of the show, Luthor was put in jail due to Lois's investigations on a murder that was pinned on Luthor despite Mannheim being the real killer. So as the truth comes out in season 3, and she makes the decision to write the story, she essentially sets the man free who will eventually be the one to kill her husband. And the thing that I love most about this version of Lex Luthor is that his vendetta is actually mostly on Lois rather than Superman. His His drive to kill Superman comes from his need to get him out of the way so he can truly destroy Lois's life and her reputation. It is so intense, and the stakes are higher because he's going after just a normal person. Seeing Lex as some hardcore metalhead with a long beard was strange for sure, and honestly had me scratching my head a lot for the first bit of his storyline. Same can be said about the Bizarro story as well, but once his plan is set in stone and Doomsday is created through Bizarro's body, and he is set loose to kill Superman, this Lex became incredibly menacing. The Doomsday fight is truly incredible, especially for the budget they had to work with, and his death was absolutely crushing. Seeing Lois, Jonathan, and Jordan sobbing over the death of Clark was so incredibly impactful, and the people of Smallville putting together the pieces and realizing that Superman was Clark Kent was quite beautiful.
Not before me. No.
Mom? Dad?
No.
Mom?
No. Boy.
Mom, is he okay? Mom, is he okay?
I love the storyline of the people from Smallville, at least most of them, not this one guy, protecting Clark's secret identity, and once Superman was resurrected, I loved every second of watching him try and fail to convince everybody in Smallville that he was not Superman. Fantastic stuff.
Ow. Okay, I'm gonna get some ice. Yeah. Ow. We need some ice! Hey, we need some ice!
But when the time comes for that one guy to ruin everything and he shoots Clark to prove that he's Superman, which is very reminiscent of the Donner cut of Superman 2, it's incredible to watch Hoagland's performance as he mourns the loss of his anonymity before letting the world in on his secret, which yes, the world is let into the secret that Clark Kent is Superman inside of this final season. And it's this moment that drives the rest of the story. Lois and Clark opening up to the rest of the world makes their push against Lex all the more powerful, and it's enough to push back against this version of Luthor, who eventually does decide to go full scheming billionaire by shaving off his beard and putting on a show as he tries to win over the world politically, which I loved. The debate between Lois and Lex was easily one of the best episodes of this series, and it's his hatred for Lois and his drive to kill Superman that is his undoing. And the epic fight between Superman and Lex Luthor in his mech suit was incredibly satisfying, and it's something that I actually really hope we get to see in James Gunn's universe at one point. But the last thing I want to praise about this show is, of course, the series finale. After Doomsday killed Superman and he was resurrected, he just wasn't the same. He was weaker, and over time he begins to lose his powers until he eventually becomes mortal. This does take several decades, but still, he loses it all, and he gets to grow old with Lois before they both end up dying of old age. It is a beautiful finale and one that genuinely brought me to tears, and is a Superman story that I genuinely believe can never be told again.
I came to this world alone. But when I left it, I had so much. And it was all because of love.
So Tyler Hoagland's Clark / Superman gets a 5 out of 5. I love him in this role, and the Lois and Clark dynamic easily gets a 5 out of 5 as well. There isn't really a Daily Planet dynamic until the final season, where we get some Jimmy Olsen cameos and some flashbacks to a younger Lois and Clark, and the legend of the Bunt King, which I loved, but the investigative side of Lois was still prevalent throughout this entire show, so still a 4 out of 5. Heroism and abilities also gets a 4 out of 5, mainly because of the show's budgetary limits, and in terms of villains, it gave me the only adaptation of Bizarro in any of these Superman projects, which is kind of, I guess he's kind of in Superman 3, but we don't really talk about that. It also has the most emotionally captivating death of Superman story with Doomsday, and possibly my favorite Lex Luthor to date. This will get a 4.5 out of 5. All right, the time has finally come. It is now time to talk about the film that motivated me to watch every single Superman movie in existence, James Gunn's Superman. So after watching over 24 Superman movies and several seasons of TV between the old George Reeves show, the animated series, and Superman and Lois, the stakes for me liking this new Superman movie became very high, and I am so happy to say that I loved this movie, and will of course be getting into spoilers for the events of this film, so if you haven't watched it yet, why? It's been out for a little while. Go watch it. It's great. So let's just get into the spoilers. All right, let's go category by category once again, starting with David Corenswet as Clark Kent / Superman. And let's get over some of the nitpicks right from the beginning, which I have to say, is with his Clark Kent. And it's no knock against his performance here at all, but his Clark really only has one scene. At least the Daily Planet version of Clark Kent only has one scene, but what we did get to see here was great. I loved his body language and his mannerisms, as it was very reminiscent of Christopher Reeve before him. His banter with Jimmy Olsen and Lombard was exactly like you want to see, and his look and hairstyle did work for me. And similar to Man of Steel, I just simply wish we got more scenes with him at the planet, because the one that we got was great, and I'm sure that if we did get more, I would have loved it just as much as the one scene that we did get. But what we did get plenty of was his Superman, who was an absolute delight to watch.
Crypto! What the hey, dude? I thought you destroyed the whole Superman robots. I thought I told you to keep an eye on him.
We feed the canine, but he is unruly.
He was glowing with hope, heroism, and optimism throughout this entire film. The movie does begin with him losing his first ever fight, but that never really stopped him from trying to do the right thing. When he gets knocked down, he gets back up. When a kaiju is about to stomp on a dog, he stops the foot and blows it to safety. When a car is about to be crushed by a building, he holds it up to let the woman get away. When a little boy calls out for Superman to stop a senseless invasion of a foreign superpower, he steps in and stops a war. Hell, he even saves a squirrel and wants to figure out a way to bring the kaiju to an intergalactic zoo before the Justice Gang show up and kill the damn thing. He is Superman. Rachel Brosnahan plays Lois Lane in this film, and besides Betsy Tulloch, she's my favorite to play this role. Her attitude and drive is perfect for the star reporter who refuses to see anything at face value. She sees the connections between the invasion of Jarhanpur and Lex Luthor's plan to discredit Superman, and is dedicated to figure out the truth for the entirety of the film. And her chemistry with Corn Sweat here is off the charts. This is for sure the sexiest these two have ever been, and every scene between them was magnetic.
Ready?
Let's do it, Cronkite.
Superman.
Miss Lane.
My two favorite scenes in this entire film are the interview scene and the one with the intergalactic imp causing havoc in the background. The interview is a perfect representation of the clashing ideologies between Lois and Clark. Lois questions everything and Clark trusts everyone, and this may break some couples apart, but as Lois sees the true humanity within Clark and the beauty in his optimistic worldview, she falls in love with him all over again, and we as an audience do the same. That damn line about Superman being worried about Krypto being alone and scared made me tear up. Damn you, James Gunn, for making me feel things inside of the theater. The Daily Planet dynamic was also fantastic. Wendell Pierce's Perry wasn't in the film too much, but what sold me on him was the scene between Lois and Jimmy trying to pitch to him the idea of Lex being this, mastermind behind all the corruption that is happening inside the world at this point in time, while the rest of the Daily Planet employees were losing their minds over the impending destruction of Metropolis. Skylar Gisondo as Jimmy Olsen was also great in here. I wasn't too sure about the weird Jimmy and Eve Tessmacher romance on first watch, but the fact that it was so integral to the plot of this film made it work even better on rewatch. Also, the bits of all the women in this film fawning over Jimmy is so incredibly funny.
Which is worth many sacrifices, that isn't one of them.
Very funny, Lois.
In terms of abilities and heroism, well, heroism is oozing out of this movie, so it has that in spades, but in terms of abilities, they are not as strong as some previous versions that came before. I do like the idea of a Superman that isn't at full Zack Snyder levels of strength just yet. He's only been at it for 3 years, and I think it sets up nicely for an eventual story where he fights Darkseid and gets to say that iconic line that everyone keeps on posting to social media.
What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am.
The action in these Snyder movies are still the best of any Superman film, but the flying sequences in particular here are top tier. Say what you will about the modern visual aesthetic about using wide-angle lenses over anamorphic, but for me, I tend to like that style that James Gunn has turned to over the years. Does anamorphic look more visually pleasing? Yeah, for sure, but the way James Gunn directs the camera in this is so much fun. The way it whips around Superman as he flies is so incredibly exciting, and it gives the film an energy that never dies out. I can't wait to see more of this Superman in action, and to see it in 3D. Honestly, I'm pretty sure it'll look great in that format as well. And as for the villain, I think we finally have a perfect adaptation of Lex Luthor. This is exactly what I've been wanting from Lex Luthor after 26 different Superman projects. Nicholas Hoult plays such an absolute hater to the core of this character. He is petty, maniacal, unhinged, and genuinely unlikable to the highest degree.
98Z. 8H.
And maybe it's my pre-existing hatred for smug billionaires who rule the world in real life, but it was just so much fun to watch him get his shit rocked by Krypto. And I really liked his evil plan in this. It is a quintessential Lex Luthor plot. He causes havoc across the world and in Metropolis to get Superman exactly where he needs to be in order to try and kill him. He has so many backup plans and even a side plot to take over half of Jarhanpur as king if he does end up killing Superman. Sound familiar? And yes, this movie is incredibly political for those who pay attention to real-world events. The Boravia and Jarhanpur plots got me very emotional as the atrocities occurring in Gaza is something that I am very passionate about, and to see it portrayed here, even if it was unintentional as this was technically written before that war broke out, maybe it's more so about the Russian-Ukrainian war, but either way, it was very heartwarming. But getting back to fiction, Luthor plans to use either Ultraman, who is a Superman clone controlled by his video game-esque counterattack moves, was great. A nice little precursor to us getting Lex in a mech suit to fight Superman himself one day, which I do hope we get, and the engineer using her microbots to try to suffocate Superman was incredibly tense. Love that Lex was able to find other ways to try and kill Superman besides using kryptonite, which tends to be a crutch in most other Superman stories. And this film is also filled with elements that establish this new DCU as a larger universe. The opening text was great as it establishes this world has known metahumans for 3 centuries. The Justice Gang was great in this. Loved Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner and his punchable haircuts. Eddie Gathegi's Mr. Terrific was a scene stealer for sure. His action sequence with Lois in the bubble was one of the most Gardens-esque moments in this entire film. Love it. And Isabel Merced as Hawkgirl was a joy to watch, and it could do absolutely no wrong. Yes, I do support what she did to Bibi Netanyahu. The leader of Boravia, for sure, that guy. Anthony Carrigan was also a ton of fun as Metamorpho. The sequence in the Pocket universe was really fun, and it was great to see Carrigan go from a more dramatic and broken performance as this character to the more comedic side of him that I loved from Barry. And of course, Krypto. How can I forget to mention Krypto, who was phenomenal in this film, and as a dog lover, very accurate. I saw one post saying that dogs' personalities usually mimic their owners, and seeing Kara at the very end show up to pick up Krypto while most likely drunk from another planet was a ton of fun. Can't wait to see her film next year. And so in all, I really did love James Gunn's Superman film, and it marks a bright beginning for the new DCU. My nitpicks after watching this movie after first viewing were the Tessmacher storyline and the lack of Clark Kent, which mostly went away on rewatch, especially the Tessmacher thing. I actually really loved it the second time around. The only thing I didn't like much at all was the twist with Clark's Kryptonian parents. I do like the way they use it inside of this story. It was a good way for Lex to try and turn the world against Superman, and the speech Superman gave when lecturing Lex at the very end was worth its entire plot point, but it still stung quite a bit as somebody who did really love the origins of Clark and Superman in Man of Steel in particular, that did have a praising of both sides of parenthood. And I have heard plenty of theories online about how this can be used in the future, like whether Zod, forced them to record that second half of the message, or maybe there'll be a future character arc where maybe Jor-El is still alive somewhere and Clark gets to meet him and gets to show him what he was inspired by for the first half of the message and prove that those ideologies that his father had was actually wrong, and maybe changes the mind of Jor-El. Maybe that could be a future arc that we get to see in the future. But either way, the one thing that I did love about this arc inside of this film was the way that it builds up the importance of the Kent family, as they were the ones who actually did raise Clark from a child, and so it made it worth it by the end. So when ranking this film, David Corenswet's Superman / Clark Kent's dynamic gets a 4.5 out of 5, with room to grow as we see more of his Clark in the future. The Lois and Clark dynamic was easily my favorite part of the film, so it of course gets a 5 out of 5. My only wish is that we got one scene between Lois and the Kent parents before she ran off to her spaceship, which is a scene that we got in one of the animated films that I really did love, but hey, we don't get everything that we always want. The Daily Planet dynamic was good on first watch, but I loved it even more on rewatch. 4 out of 5 for that. Heroism and abilities gets a 4.5 out of 5, as the heroism makes up for any downgrade in abilities from Man of Steel, and Nicholas Holt's villainous Lex Luthor gets a 5 out of 5, as it's my favorite adaptation of this character that I've seen so many times throughout this entire journey. So there we have it, 3 super long videos covering 26 Superman films and TV shows. It has been quite a journey following this character from his first ever live action appearance in 1948 to his latest turn in 2025. Despite some of the ups and downs, I did really love my time watching every single one of these films, and of course, to wrap it all up, it is time to rank every single Superman film ever in my definitive rankings of Superman throughout film history. Number 26, Supergirl, 1984. Number 25, Superman Brainiac Attacks. Number 24, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Number 23, Superman and the Mole Men. Number 22, Adam-Man vs. Superman. Number 21, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Number 20, Superman 3. Number 19, Superman Unbound. Number 18, Superman Batman Apocalypse. Number 17, Superman 2, The Richard Donner Cut. Number 16, Superman Doomsday. Number 15, Superman Batman Public Enemies. Number 14, Superman Red Sun. Number 13, Superman 1948. Number 12, Superman 2, Theatrical Cut. Number 11, Superman Man of Tomorrow. Number 10, Reign of Superman. Number 9, Man of Steel. Number 8, Batman and Superman, Battle of the Super Sons. Number 7, All-Star Superman. Number 6, The Death of Superman. Number 5, Superman vs. the Elites. Number 4, Superman Returns. Number 3, Superman 1978. Number 2, Superman and Lois. And at number 1, Superman 2025. But those are just going to be my thoughts on all things Superman. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you agree with my list, or do you hate my take on this new Superman movie? Either way, leave your rankings for me to see. I cannot wait to see all of your lists down below. And if you enjoyed this 3-part series, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this. This series was a daunting task for me to complete, and I am so happy to finally be done. I will hopefully be back to normal reviews here on the channel, so definitely keep an eye out for my review on Fantastic Four next week, and together at the very end of the month. Thanks again for sticking with me through this long journey, and I hope to see you all in my next video.